covering everything that you need to know in talent experience.
People applying for new positions is like the cherry on top.
With the technology to attract talent.
Recruiters always know their best talent.
DEI just wants to use that information.
Inclusion efforts across the organization.
Tell me what it's like to work for through associate story.
Interviews with leaders in the industry. Talk about what's new in HR tech. What are the hot topics? We're here every week, folks. Weekly look at the latest and greatest topics in HR. Hey everyone, welcome to Talent Experience Live. This is, as I like to say, the greatest show on the internet. Bold statement, I know, but it's true. This is the place to be every week. If you're a recruiter, a sourcer, a talent marketer, talent manager, if you're in HR, we'd love to have you here. I'm your host, Tom Tate. I'm on the marketing team here at Phenom. It is a pleasure to be here. I love watching that intro. Super exciting. Love the music. Gets me pumped up on a Thursday. If you're just joining us, we go live every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. Be sure to like, subscribe, get notified. If you're on YouTube, click that little bell so you get the notification. We want to make sure you never miss a beat. We love being here, and we love it when you can join us too. Talent Experience Live is proudly brought to you by the team here at Phenom. Our purpose at Phenom is to help 1 billion people find the right job. It is a true billion, not a typo, not a million. We're well on our way. It is very exciting purpose, and we can't do it without you and our amazing community. So for all of those who are tuning in, watching the replay, we appreciate it. You're a part of the mission. Thank you. Our Talent Experience platform helps candidates find the right fit faster. It helps employees evolve in their current role and beyond, helps recruiters achieve some of that next level productivity and efficiency, and helps managers build better teams with data, analytics, and automation. All of this is powered by super slick artificial intelligence and machine learning. You can head on over to phenom.com if you want to learn more, if you're interested in what we do. Shout out to our video producer, Justin Devitt. He is behind the scenes, pulling the strings, pulling the levers, pressing the buttons, making it happen. Thank you. Shout out to our executive producer on this episode, Patri Chioppa. She's in the chat. Feel free to engage with Patri. She plans our program content. She connects with our guests. The list goes on. She does so much behind the scenes, and she's always on the lookout for future guests and future topics. So connect with her on LinkedIn or in the chat. We'd love to hear what you want to hear on future episodes. One of the things we like to do is hear from you. So let me know who you are, where you're from, what you do. Talent Experience Live is a cool opportunity to connect with each other, network with each other. Find your peers. So definitely chime in, LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook. We can see the chat. We want to know who's here, who's chatting. And before we begin, I just want to say it has been a very difficult week, right? And I just want to acknowledge that, right? And kind of acknowledge kind of the atrocities of war that we've all been witnessing on the news and in social media. I had a call, a few of us had a call with an analyst earlier this week, and we were talking about it. And he brought up a really good point. You know, in our parents' and our grandparents' era, when war was happening abroad, or even if it was happening nearby, if you weren't directly affected, you would get the daily news bulletin that would come on once a day or twice a day, or you'd sit down and read about it in the paper in the morning. But after that, you know, it was back to work and back to business as usual. And now, as we're all experiencing, we're inundated with news and imagery and information. And it's just the way that we operate today. And I know Talent Experience Live is not a political show. And of course, this episode is not a political episode. But I'm really just speaking on behalf of myself. I'm not really speaking on behalf of our team here at Phenom. But I think we can all agree that it's been a challenging week, and it's been very challenging to see what we're seeing and then just flip the switch, hop back on Zoom calls, or even produce a LinkedIn live stream like what we're doing today, right? So it's very difficult to just kind of go back and forth seamlessly. But I do think that it's important that we continue to show up. We continue to show up for ourselves and for each other. Very important. So we're excited to be here with Talent Experience Live. We have an amazing guest today. And this is a global show, you know, so my heart goes out to anyone who's been directly impacted by this conflict. And if you're having a challenging week, we hear you, we see you. Definitely talk to your peers, talk to your managers, talk to your friends and family, be honest how you're feeling, and we'll push forward. We'll push forward together. So That leads us to our icebreaker question today. So for our icebreaker question, and I just want to hear from everybody in the chat. What is one thing this past week that has sparked joy? Let's bring a little joy into our lives. I'm channeling my inner Marie Kondo here, right? What is one thing this past week that has sparked joy for you? Would love to hear in the chat what that one thing is. I'll share mine first, right? So my daughters have been giving me the best unsolicited hugs this week. It's been amazing, right? So unsolicited, unprompted, unexpected. Those are the absolute best. My daughters are clingers. I wouldn't have it any other way. It's awesome. And I've also been inspired. It's Employee Appreciation Week at Phenom. There's been a ton of great activities that have been happening. We've had virtual group yoga, group stretching, virtual meditation. At the Ambler office, just outside of Philadelphia, they had a group that was assembling bicycles, kids' bicycles for local families in need. And I'm sure I'm missing a ton of awesome things that we've done, but Employee Appreciation Week has been pretty great at Phenom. So really excited about that. So shout out in the chat. Let us know what has sparked joy as we get into today's topic. So today we are taking on another big topic. Last week we took on a big topic, the annual performance review. This week we're taking on another big topic. We're going to talk about kind of the continued evolution of diversity and inclusion, right? This isn't something that could have been defined 5-10 years ago and it just sticks, right? It's continuing to evolve. And we're going to talk about how we can help companies build this culture of belonging that both attracts and retains talent. And ultimately, this is going to lead to a stronger, more profitable organization. We all know this, but how do we do it, right? How do we set the wheels in motion so that we can really do it? And what does all of this mean? So we have an amazing guest. Kristina Kohl is with us. She's a friend of the show. She's a repeat guest. She was on back in January, I believe, of 2021. So really happy to have her join. She's the managing principal at HRComputes. HRComputes, if you are not familiar, leading consulting group, and they really bring a transformational perspective to the management of human resources. We've been working with HRComputes here at Phenom, and they're absolutely incredible. So Kristina, she's also an author. She's the author of Becoming a Sustainable Organization, a project and portfolio management approach. And her latest book was just released back in January of this year, Driving Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. So I am super excited to bring Kristina onto the show. Kristina, welcome. How are you?
I'm well, Tom. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you back to really talk about this topic that, we started the conversation with you, Kristina, back in January of 2021 when you were on with my former colleague, Devin Foster. That episode was all about DE&I being a continuum that matures over time. So it makes perfect sense to have you back on to continue the conversation. So I'm super excited to have you. We always like to kind of turn the tables and really bring on our guests and ask them that same icebreaker question. So is there anything that has sparked joy for you over the past week?
Yes. In fact, this past weekend, I was in Brooklyn for the first time in about 2 years. I was able to meet in person with my students. So it really did bring me great joy to get to meet them and see them in person, although I only got to see their eyes really because they still had to wear masks. But it was really wonderful to be together for the first time in 2 years and not having residencies online. So that brought me great joy.
That's a beautiful thing, right? And we're seeing that in the comments here too. It really does feel like people are getting out and about. Maggie had mentioned she got to see the Harry Potter exhibit in Philadelphia, which is exciting. Nicholas Tate, no relation to me, of course, seeing my favorite band come back to Philadelphia. So live music is back in action. We also had Patrizia chime in saying that she was organizing a celebration for a birthday party. It's exciting to see people come together again. Very, very awesome. Linda had mentioned too, lunch with a great group of women leaders. Very, very exciting. So glad that you had the opportunity to do that and get back with your students. I hope that Brooklyn and New York is vibrant as ever these days. I want to get into the conversation. So, why don't you tell us just a little bit about what you do before we get into kind of your background with diversity and inclusion? What is your
Absolutely.
primary role, and what are you up to at HR Computes?
Absolutely. My primary role is as the managing principal, so I handle the business aspect of the business, but I also work with clients. And over the years, we've done a tremendous amount of work around digital transformation and helping drive data-driven decision making. And it's evolved over time, the data that's available and how it's used. But diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging have been part of that conversation for approximately 20 years. But we're really looking to help organizations move the needle and drive systemic impact both within their organizations and within the broader systemic systems, social systems, economic systems across both the U.S. and globally.
So I know it's been a part of the conversation, but is there anything specifically that sparked you to become very passionate about helping organizations drive more into creating this inclusive and diverse culture?
Yes, I think a lot of these conversations focus on check the box exercises,
Sure.
unfortunately. People are trying to do the minimum compliance required. Unfortunately, a lot of conversations with leadership focus on, will I get a discount on my insurance policy because I've provided sexual harassment training? It's what really inspired me was to think about how can we drive meaningful change? How can we take the lessons that we've learned over the last 20 years and say, what do we need to do today to really drive belonging in organizations? And that's really what prompted me to write the book. Um, it's a
Yep.
it's a snapshot of it. And the book includes, lots and lots of different voices, lots of different case studies, lots of different examples. But really, the driving factor was, how do we offer leadership a new toolkit? Because using the toolkit from the 20th century, trying to address 21st century challenges, just is no longer working.
Sure.
And so, leadership needs a new toolkit, managers need a new toolkit. And that's really what inspired me to do this work and to write the book.
Yeah, and it's exciting to see the book come to fruition. I know we spoke a while ago that you were working on it. So how long, like just to give people a glimpse kind of into the process of publishing, how long have you been working on this book?
Well, I started this book well, obviously the research, the experience gathering, the networking started well before this, but
Sure.
my first submission to my publisher was in the summer of 2020. Actually before the summer of 2020, because it occurred before the unfortunate murder of George Floyd. So probably the spring of 2020 is when I made the submission, and then there's a whole process that you go through, and it was actually published in January of 2022. So it is a long
Yeah.
long
Yeah.
cycle.
Well, it's great to see it. We do have a link that we will include in the chat to really pick up this book, purchase it. Patrizia put it on LinkedIn, and we'll include that also in the recap for this episode as well too. So that will also help you get 20% off, which is super helpful if you're interested in this. If this conversation moves you, if you want to bring it to your senior leadership, this book will definitely be a great asset to leverage in those conversations. So one of the things, we need to bring people from the 20th to the 21st century, right? So much has changed. I also feel like, from just the way we talk about these topics, so much has changed. And one of the things that I've noticed, just the visual cue, right? The acronyms are evolving, so I was new to HR tech when I joined Phenom. Obviously, I was familiar with diversity and inclusion, but for me, it was always D&I. And as I started to learn more and get more immersed into the HR space, I learned it's actually DE&I, right? And now I'm starting to see an evolution into DEB&I or DEIB, introducing an additional letter in the alphabet, right? So I was hoping you could kind of talk us through a little bit. Um, why do you think this has been evolving? This acronym has been adding additional words, additional terms. And then for anybody who just needs kind of like level set on the definitions, maybe we can kind of walk through really fast. DEIB, what are the words? What do they mean? And then we can kind of get into some of the nuances, some of the differences that are coming across. So, uh, what is the Karen acronym? That you've been working with, Kristina, and what words are we looking at here?
Well, let me answer your first question.
Sure.
So DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. And each of those words means something a little different. And I'll answer the second part of the question later after we talk about this part a little bit. I think inclusion, well, actually, let me refer, Vera Myers coined a phrase: diversity is being asked to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. And I would say belonging is one step beyond that. And that would be being asked to plan the party, being asked to select the music, really being involved in what's going to happen at the party. So inclusion, and often DEI is used, and the I is used to mean both belonging and inclusion. So I don't want anyone to get too crazy over it. But
Sure.
I think inclusion can have limitations, and it depends upon your perspective and organization's perspective. Inclusion often looks at a dominant culture. So there's a culture of an organization, and there is one dominant culture, and inclusion means we're happy to have you come and be part of our dominant culture. And that's what we've seen for pretty much the history of diversity and inclusion, right? Everyone was welcome to join a certain dominant culture, but unfortunately, that dominant culture did not work for a lot of people, a lot of women, a lot of BIPOC individuals. It did not work. So belonging is really this idea that we're going to create an equitable culture, one that isn't a single dominant culture, one that supports the needs of a variety of individuals, whatever they may be, and that you truly are welcome to bring your true self to work, and that your needs and requirements will be addressed, that benefits will be adapted, that work structures will be adapted, that you can really show up, bring your best self, do your best job, and we want to support you as an organization. So I think that kind of frames the difference between inclusion and belonging. I think some people do refer to a broad definition for inclusion, but if you're just a dominant organization asking people, hey, come work here, but use all of our work structures, use all of our existing requirements, we're not adapting anything for you and your requirements, that is going to be very limiting. So hopefully that explains that.
It definitely does. And I think it also kind of calls back to what you mentioned earlier about so many organizations just check the box, and inclusion, thinking about inclusion as asking someone to dance. Sometimes it is just to check the box, let's make sure we ask everyone to dance. Right. And one of the nuances that I think about when I think about belonging, and I'd love to know your thoughts on this as well. It's, does everyone feel comfortable dancing? Right. It's more of a feeling. Does everyone feel accepted when they're on the dance floor? Does everyone feel comfortable? Amy actually, mentions in the chat here, could belonging be more about feeling safe and supported as who you are? So inclusion feels more like a formality. Belonging feels more like a feeling, to me at least. And I'm curious, do you have any thoughts on that? Or is that in line with how you think about it or how you talk about it with organizations?
Absolutely. And I think, from a stress level point of view, feeling as if you don't belong at work is like only secondary to not belonging in your own home. I mean, it is vital to feel that you can come to work and represent, who you are, be valued for what you say, be heard, be appreciated. All of these things relate highly to employee engagement and directly are related to employee retention. So, absolutely, it is a feeling. It's how you feel you are valued and appreciated in an organization.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that too, because for many knowledge workers, we are working in our homes, right? So if you can't feel like you belong at work, in a way, it's like you don't belong at home, right? Because you're spending most of your time there, and it's a really hard thing to switch on and off, if that's the case. One of the things we talk about, and one of the things you've mentioned as well, is kind of creating a culture of belonging. And I just want to get your thoughts on. Uh, Culture sometimes is a fuzzy word, right? So when we start to think about what is a culture of belonging, what does that look like for an organization? Um, where do you begin? Where do you begin with that kind of idea? I know one of the go-to opportunities here is to think about it as a continuum, right? And to think about it as a model that you can follow. So when you're working with organizations and you're thinking about fostering this culture, what is your go-to kind of maturity model to help start to guide the conversation and then to help the organization start to guide their actions?
Well, that's a great question. I have created something that I call the JEDI, Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Maturity Continuum. And JEDI, the reason I use that in my book is that I'm interested at looking at the intersection of environmental and social justice, because I feel that those two pieces intersect greatly in organizations, and that if we're talking about equity, inclusion, and belonging, we really have to be cognizant of what we're doing in our environmental areas. Are we polluting the communities that we're in, and not, it's fine maybe that we're offering people jobs, but are those jobs impacting their health negatively? And are we making their children sick by what we're doing? So there's a there's an intersectionality between those concepts. So that's why I use the term JEDI, and we talk a little bit about that in the book. But from a model perspective, I think it's really important to do an assessment of where you are, and I do offer an assessment in the book, and of course you can add questions to the assessment. You can do your own assessment. You can hire a firm to do an assessment, but I think it's really important to get the voice of at least initially your employees to understand, where you are in the process, and then kind of evolving from that, your external stakeholders as well, your community members, to understand how they are perceiving your organization. But from a continuum perspective, I start with compliance, and that's kind of back to the check the box. Like, are we simply trying to meet our compliance requirements as an organization? Do we meet our EEOC reporting? Do we, whatever pay requirements we have to meet to satisfy government regulators? Is that our DEI strategy? And if you are looking at that's a very kind of elementary strategy. The players are often your legal department, maybe HR. And as you evolve through this continuum, the players change. And as you mature, this becomes much more of a strategy, an overall strategy for your organization. So you move from compliance to awareness, being aware of what you're trying to achieve and what's really happening in your organization. And that's where you might see more of an assessment taking place.
Sure.
And then how are you integrating it into your operations? Kind of the first steps of embedding it down to the employee level. How is it impacting everyone's daily job? And then really looking at what are all the systems of the organization. What are our recruitment systems? What are our talent development systems? What are our systems for identifying high potential employees? What are our systems for identifying and training new leaders? How are our systems gathering data? How are we procuring services? What are our standards there? what is our philanthropic and volunteer outreach to the community? All of these systems that are embedded in your organization. What is your compensation system? What are you really rewarding people for? What is our decision making,
Sure.
process
Yeah.
system? All of these things,
Yeah. So,
get piled in. And then the end of that is systemic, and that's really more looking outward, and how can you build partnerships and really drive change both internally and externally.
yeah.
Sorry, long answer.
No, that's a great answer. So, compliance, starting at checking the box, and Bambi, mentions here too, just a great point, meeting compliance level versus setting the bar high, super important. And for many organizations, maybe that is where they're at and where they start, right? And it's all about taking it to the next step. So you mentioned awareness, integration, embedding it within your organization, and then systemic. I really do appreciate, and maybe this ties back to your other book, becoming a sustainable organization. But it sounds like uh, your research has combined, to really paint the full picture, of how an organization can be both inclusive, but also sustainable, which is important work for sure. So thinking through kind of that, I did have one question about the assessment. Um, can you give us just a glimpse into what, one or two of the insights that an organization might be able to glean from a type of assessment like that? Because you mentioned, being able to survey employees and learn from employees. Like, what are like maybe one or two top insights that you typically see organizations begin to understand better when they go through that process?
I think topics around like perception within the organization, how employees perceive their leadership, how they perceive opportunities, how they perceive, flexibility to support their needs, communication, all of those kinds of elements are part of what you can gather with these surveys. I mean, you can go very, very deep. You can go pulse surveys. It
Sure.
really depends upon, again, your strategy. I think I can't overstress the importance of having a strategy and aligning it with your overall business strategy so that your Jedi strategy gets funding, gets priorities, gets resources, and is on the board and leadership's agenda so that you can move this journey forward. So often people start with a one-off, like let's form a DEI committee. Well, there's nothing wrong with that, except for the DEI committee doesn't really necessarily understand their mandate or what resources they have or how they can affect change or where the organization really wants to go. And so, you have it, but it burns out very quickly because there's no tangible action that they're able to take or able to feel that they've taken, to drive change. It just becomes a series of roadblocks for them. So it's really important to think about where you want to take your organization and then layer in different tools and techniques to achieve that.
Yeah, I can totally see that. If it's not tied to a North Star, then
Right,
the committee might not have a sense of where to go.
right.
So it might just be one-off ideas, execute and see how things work and see what sticks, and it's not really embracing a true maturity model, which you laid out for us. One of the things you did mention was, a couple of the key stakeholders, in those early stages, it might be legal, that might be kind of the go-to players. But as you move through the model, you mentioned new players start to arise and get more invested. So who are kind of the key players that should be involved in the conversations and the development of an execution of a maturity model like this?
Well, really, it's a board level initiative. Your board needs to be on board. They need to do some self reflection. They need to understand what they are representing to the organization and to the broader community and stakeholders. And then it really, as it evolves, it becomes part of your overall strategy. So it is on the C-suite agenda, and it is made part of different business leaders, goals and objectives. Compensation is tied to achieving those. It really becomes embedded across the organization. And I think, it's both a top-down and a bottom-up strategy. It has to be led by the top because it has to be strategically aligned. But the top has to be open and have a feedback mechanism to hear from employees, to see how they're doing, to see what impacts they're having, to understand if they have a systemic challenge across the organization, or if they have pockets of challenges, or if they have pockets of great success. One of the tools that I'm a big believer in is appreciative inquiry, where you look at what is successful and you create a vision of how you want things to be, and then you replicate that across the organization. So there's great opportunity not just to solve problems, but to leverage successes, what I call conditions for success, because what you really want to create are those conditions where you've made people feel they belong, where people are really feeling as if they are fully contributing and being valued members of your organization. And those managers that are successfully doing that, those team leaders that are successfully doing that, you want to share those best practices and replicate that across your organization.
I'd imagine that if you don't get that buy-in from the top, this isn't going to go anywhere, right? Like it does feel that way. Have you seen organizations where it just stops right there? They fail to really get the full buy-in and the ability to model the appropriate behaviors and set the North Star from the top. Has that been your experience?
Yes, I mean, I think often what happens is that it's unfortunately looked at sometimes as a numbers game. Okay,
Okay.
so we need our diversity to be more representational. Fix that by next quarter. Well, that is not how this works, right? You can't just change your numbers. You may be able to try to change your numbers, but your numbers are not going to stick because you haven't created a culture that values diversity, that values identity diversity, diversity of experience, diversity of thought. I mean, diversity covers a lot of elements. One of the cases in the book talks about UKG and their approach to creating a culture where they are incorporating people with disabilities and making a culture that is welcoming to them, everything from accessibility on all different levels to opportunities being created, changing their recruiting processes, and it's just very it's very important to understand that this is a journey, and that there is no easy button, and that's why senior leadership really needs to be on board, because all of that takes time, talent, and resources to make the change.
What are your thoughts on, because one of the things I've noticed since 2020 is just an increase in awareness around the role of like a chief diversity officer or, a dedicated executive sitting in that role to help drive some of the strategy. Do you think that that's a necessary role for most organizations, or do you think that a driven existing C-suite or a driven and knowledgeable CHRO could manage that without having the dedicated role? I'm just kind of curious, your experience and your thoughts on that.
So, I think it depends. I certainly give an example of the role for a chief diversity officer in the book, and kind of the breadth of responsibilities that individual would be taking on. I think there are pros and cons. I think just like in something similar on the environmental side, you have a chief sustainability officer, and I think at a certain point in your journey, for both organizations, that makes sense. But you don't want to have diversity and the responsibility for diversity to be siloed with the chief diversity officer,
Sure.
right? So it really depends upon how the role is established and set up. And it's very, very important that that role is designed to work with other leaders to impact what they're doing within their own business functions, and that it's not just on the chief diversity officer, because that's not going to work. That's just that's a siloed approach. But it does give a dedicated resource, and it gives a dedicated team to focus on this. So I think that that is very impactful and shows commitment from the organization. I've seen people hire in those roles and then back off from those roles and have other other executives take different pieces of that and be responsible. So I think it depends upon the level of maturity again,
Sure.
and how it's managed and the commitment behind it.
I could totally see that being another example of checking the box. We've hired the executive, we've done our part, and not
Right.
moving through the actual continuum model, right? And moving to some of those later stages. And if it's siloed, you make a great point. You're never going to get to that embedded or systemic level, right? Keeping
Right.
it siloed to just one individual or one department.
Right.
You have shared kind of a strategic 5P plan. People is just one part of that. Are there any other elements of the 5P plan that you want to touch upon before we kind of move on to some other topics?
Sure. And actually, that 5P model is Cara Pelletier's model that she shares in Chapter 9. And it was part of the approach at UltiPro to design a culture of belonging for people with disabilities. And I think the first part of the model, it's actually kind of the 6P, is why are what are you trying to achieve? So what is the purpose of what you're doing? And have a clear purpose and understand precisely what you're trying to achieve, because this can become very amorphous otherwise. Starting with people, it's not only the people you're trying to serve, but people that you're going to be interacting with. So there will be ambassadors to what you're trying to do. There will be blockers to what you're trying to do. There will be people that are passive, and just not doing anything. So you really need to figure out with your stakeholders who's in what group and how can we best manage that process. And then think about, with the purpose you're trying to achieve, what programs are you going to try to launch over what period of time? What are you going to pilot things? What can you do and who can help support you across the organization? And then, talking about systems, taking a deep dive into your policies and processes and understanding what's in your employee handbook and if that's limiting to certain people. In this example, it talks about, dress code and what people with mobility disabilities might need in terms of dress code, as opposed to perhaps what's in your handbook. So just all kinds of things need to be looked at, what your processes are, what your policies are, and then thinking about who can you partner with. In that case, they partnered with Disability In to help drive their program formation, which was a very useful framework so that you're not reinventing the wheel. I don't know if we have really time to get into it today, but the P-TECH model is with IBM, and that is a redesign of the education system to make it a 6-year, as opposed to a 4-year high school, make it a 6-year, including 2 years of an associate's degree, so that we have workers for the new collar or gray collar workforce. And it's a very interesting scalable model that they started in Brooklyn actually several years ago, and now it's being used globally to try to transform opportunities for our youth and create the next pool of talent for the gray collar workforce. So those are examples of kind of partnerships in that 5P.
That's super helpful. So people, programs, policies, processes, and partners. And that is all covered in the book. So if anybody wants to learn more, definitely check out the book. We have a link in the comments here. And then also we will include the link in the notes for this episode as well. One of the things you mentioned at the top of the show was just this idea of, everything has to move forward from the 20th century to the 21st century, how we talk about it, the maturity model, how employees respond and react to diversity and inclusion and belonging, and the technology, right? So when we think about the technology aspect of it, whether it's artificial intelligence or some of the automation we're seeing, obviously things moving to a more virtual world with virtual interviews and automated interviews. Um, what role do you see this technology playing in either building a culture of belonging, or maybe the flip side too is what are some of the red flags we need to look out for to make sure that we're not uh, really putting a blocker up, to this culture of belonging?
Great question. So let me take the first part first.
Sure.
I think that data is important because lots and lots of studies show that leadership teams want to make data-driven decisions, but most of them are not there yet. Most decision making is still based on intuition, and intuition is full of bias. You only know what you know. So you're not, if you can move the needle on that and gather data and look at what skills are really driving success in a role, whose performance is really best, how just how things are really happening in the organization as opposed to whatever you think is happening. That really does remove quite a bit of bias and really does improve decision making and helps to level the playing field tremendously. And I think a lot of organizations are in the process of doing that. Many have not really achieved that level. I think tying into that, making data available for managers so that they have dashboards that are current and give accurate information can help them in their decision-making process around who gets the next opportunity, who gets the stretch assignment, who am I going to hire, and then tying their own goals and compensation to your strategy as an organization, to your North Star as an organization, and saying, we want you as a manager to achieve these goals around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And this is what your dashboard says. You have an opportunity to perhaps change the dynamic by a decision you're going to make. We want you to move in that direction. But without that data, it's very hard for managers to really understand, real-time decisions and the impact on the performance on those, on those areas. So I'm a big proponent of getting data, increasing access for managers. I also think that technology can increase transparency overall. One of the things I like about Phenom is that it's skills based. So jobs that come up are skills related jobs. It's not, some of these secret jobs get removed, right? If you are a candidate and you have the qualifications, jobs are going to be shown to you in the Phenom system. It's not, there's not a holding back on that. And in terms of internal mobility, I think it's the same way, that you are able to see what's available within an organization and see what skills you might need to achieve that position, and then what learning or development or opportunities you might need to undertake to get there. That transparency helps to level the playing field. It takes decisions out of a closed door room where someone says, how about Joe? And everyone else says, oh yeah, we know Joe, okay. Because that's just how too many decisions have been made historically, and quite frankly, often continue to be made. So really being more transparent about opportunities, about what is required, about the path. What is the path to leadership? Who do we share that with? And do we make that more readily available? And looking at different pathways to a position, not having a single siloed pathway. I think data, information, and AI breaks down silos and kind of removes a little bit of the fiefdom approach to managing business, where, oh, I'm keeping Joanna because she is a great worker, even though there's a great opportunity over in finance for her, I'm not gonna share that because
Sure.
then
Yep.
I'll have a hole
Yeah.
here. So I mean, I think all of that is part of it. Not to mention, with Phenom and the platform, the ability to share authentically stories from your employees, videos. You don't want to include things that aren't real, but do include things that are real, because people need to see role models. They need to see reflections of themselves in your organization. And so I think technology can help with that. It can help show who's really there. Maybe you only get to meet in person 5 people in an organization,
Sure.
but there may be 1,000 people. So being able to see who's really there, what they're doing, what their experiences have been, I think is very, very helpful. And technology can help with all of that. I think on the opposite side, we do have to be very careful about, algorithms that are not clearly stated, how they're created.
Yep.
I think we have to be super careful about what data sets are used, whose voices are heard from when these tools are selected and created and applications are designed for how they might be used. So I think, I do have a whole checklist in the book about just thinking about things when you're using AI tools. Can be very powerful, very useful, but you need to be transparent with people about the data that's being used, and you need a broad cross section of representation for understanding different perspectives on how these tools can impact people. So I won't go into it anymore, but I think those are 2 things to really think about.
Super helpful. Amy actually brought that up in the chat. The data needs to be free of bias, or at least we need to know much more about how it's collected. Transparency, of course, and algorithms as well. Models, algorithms. It's all critical that you know what's going into it, so you can better understand the output and make sure that it's fair. Two reflections on what you mentioned. I worked for previous organizations where, not Phenom, but in a few other jobs where diversity was just a hiring metric, right? It was a talent acquisition metric, right? And I think even a conversation that was happening in the chat between Patrizia and Amy, it really, and you back this up as well, it really needs to be all about who's moving in the organization, right? That internal mobility, right? Understanding it's not just getting folks in the door, but really understanding how we can provide those paths moving forward. And I really appreciated that using technology to tell stories, because I find that it can be very hard just looking at job descriptions alone, to give people confidence, the confidence that they need to act on just seeing that job description or that opportunity. And I think confidence goes a long way. And I think being able to show people success stories from other colleagues, being able to show the path, to show what skills you need, to show what opportunities that organization has to get those skills. So it's not just, here are the skills you need, good luck, go find them, but here are the skills you need, and here are the opportunities that we have here to help you get them. It all builds up that confidence, so that it's not just Joe down the hall who's already confident because he looks like everyone else and he has a good rapport with everyone else. I think that that's critical. Morris also chimes in, just echoing transparency and breaking down barriers. Super great point. So what are some tools that we have, to help really start to begin to promote this in the workplace? We talked about technology, being able to elevate jobs based on best fit, being able to provide teams with data. What are some of your other kind of top tools that organizations are leveraging to begin to promote belonging globally within the workforce?
Absolutely. Thanks, Tom. I had mentioned before kind of redesigning systems with this appreciative inquiry approach, thinking about what is possible and gathering voices to, envision what is a workplace that I'd like to both work in and the community I'd like to live in, and what does that look like? Excuse me, I was trying to drink to settle that cough, but it didn't work. Also, redesigning our philanthropic efforts. what are we doing for the community, and are we, are we helping or hurting? There's a lot of debate about that, and that really needs to be evaluated and redesigned. Looking at leadership development and being more transparent about the process and being more inclusive and pushing leadership development lower into the organization. So often we ask people to take on management roles and they've had absolutely no training. The first time leadership training happens is when they're in more senior positions. Yet team leaders, first level managers, they all need this type of training to be more equitable and inclusive leaders going forward. I think, as I said before, giving opportunities for authentic storytelling, encouraging diverse voices, sharing their experiences, having management be available and listening, going on listening tours, hearing and being open to really what's going on. And then there are a variety of tools like ERGs. I think employee resource groups or affinity groups can be very powerful, but they have to be empowered. They have to be given budgets. They have to be strategically aligned. It often works best if there's a senior leader that's affiliated with the ERG so that they can give guidance and feedback, back and forth. Setting your leadership requirements so that one of the things that future leaders need to do is to be, a sponsor or an ally or a mentor, and being able to speak to their experiences in doing that as part of, your leadership development. So, there are a number of different tools, but those are a few to think about.
So if you had to give kind of any senior HR leaders kind of like that one thing, what's the one thing that they can do today to get started kind of building this culture of belonging? I know we just mentioned a ton of tools that they can tap into. But what is the one thing aside from purchasing your book, of course, which has all the frameworks and well-researched examples. But is there kind of a go-to starting point for people to kind of look towards?
Well, I think listening is very, very important. Being open to hearing what's going on in the organization, and even if you can't get other parts of the organization involved, you can start by listening to your own people and building trust and credibility within your own immediate team. I really think it is important to have a strategy and to be very intentional about what you're doing. But that does require, senior leadership buy-in. So if you are, if you're just trying to start small, start with your team, listen to what they have to say, think about your team dynamics, think about, even do a visioning exercise with them around what would make a great team dynamic for them, and work towards putting that together and enacting those ideas. And then you have a test case, you have a pilot, and you can share that, across the organization.
Awesome. Yeah, great tip. As we begin to wrap things up, if any of our listeners on LinkedIn, if you have any questions for Kristina, feel free to chime in to the chats. We'll try to field a few if you have any. Otherwise, Kristina, any final thoughts before we wrap up the conversation?
I just really appreciate being here today and sharing this message. I think it's an important message, and I think leaders in the 21st century really do need to think differently. We've heard a lot about the Great Resignation. I think that's probably more about the Great Realignment. People are valuing different things. The workforce is changing. The predominant, the largest percentage of workforce participants are now millennials, and they have a different view. And it's something that we all really need to consider. And it's not only the right thing to do, ultimately, long term, it is the most profitable thing to do as well.
Yeah, and Morris backs that up. Jedi Pursuit makes financial sense as well. So it certainly is going to lead towards that. Linda has a very nice comment here. So Linda says, thank you. Saw you at a Meet the Author event last week. Her book shipped today, and her organization is in the awareness phase of their journey. Linda, thank you so much for attending today and chiming into the chat here. We really appreciate that. Patricia chimes in and says, thanks for joining us as well. So that book, of course, that Linda mentioned was Driving Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. There it is right there, written by Kristina herself, published just in January of this year. So it is relatively hot off the press. You can get it. We have a link in the chat here. We'll repost that link. And there's also a code that you can use, FLA22 at checkout to receive 20% off. If you want to get your copy, share it with your leadership team. If you're not already on the leadership team, it's going to provide you with the frameworks, again, the well-researched examples of organizations that are doing this really well, and all the tools that we mentioned earlier. So definitely check that out. Kristina, this has been your second appearance on Talent Experience Live. I have no doubt that you will be back for more as this topic continues to evolve. And I would love to also have you on to talk about sustainability, because I know that's another area that you have focused on in the past and you're passionate about. And I think that will, continue to evolve in the conversation as well. And like we mentioned earlier, there's a lot of cross section here, between sustainability and diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Anita asks if it's sold in Europe. I'm assuming so.
Yes, I mean it's Taylor and Francis is the publisher, Routledge. It's sold everywhere. So yes, you can get it anywhere. The discount code is just for the Routledge site. They're offering, if you come to one of my events, I'm able to offer you that as a thank you. But yeah, Amazon, everyone has it.
Cool. Awesome. Well, Kristina, thank you so much for joining today. Hope you have a fantastic week, and we will definitely have you back on a future episode.
Thank you, Tom. Really appreciate it. And thank you, Patricia. Appreciate it.
Take care.
Take
Bye.
care.
Awesome. Well, there you have it. Another episode in the books with the amazing Kristina Kohl. Again, she joined us last year, January 2021. We're happy to have her back in 2022. And we will continue to have this conversation, and we will continue to tap into the expertise of really the folks who are doing the research. They're doing the research. They're talking to organizations. They're listening. They're processing, and they're publishing. I mean, this book is a great example of hours and hours and hours, I'm sure, of hard work to produce something that any organization can take and really leverage to make meaningful action in this area, right? Not just say it. I think the title of the last Talent Experience Live episode was Walking the Walk, right? Anyone can talk the talk, check the box, but how do you walk the walk? You can't do it alone. You can't do it with an ad hoc diversity committee, formed with just a handful of people meeting on Thursdays over coffee or lunch. You really need to make some great strides, and hopefully this episode and this book that we shared will help you do that. So again, my name is Tom Tate. Happy to be here with Talent Experience Live. We are here every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. Next week, we will be talking about high volume hiring. So all those organizations that are panicking to fill those open roles, and they need to do it quick. They need to do it fast. They need to do it fair. As we mentioned earlier today, how can you leverage technology? What are good organizations doing to really hire fast and fair in the high volume space? So we'll be talking about that. We have a great guest. Adam Thompson will be joining us from Phenom. So we're really excited about that. So tune in next week, Thursday, 12 p.m. Eastern, LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook. Happy to have you. Hope you have a fantastic week. Hope you find something that sparks joy for you this weekend. Disconnect, find something that you can tap into that will bring some light into your life. And hopefully we will see you on the next episode. Take care.